Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We are back, and we are waking up with watches. As ever, all you see on this show today is for sale. And to reach out with questions about price, condition, or accessories, contact me directly, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. And if you're looking to sell a watch or even an entire collection, we're looking to buy and build inventory with no upper limit on cash paid. Remember, if you want to buy, trade, or sell, reach out to me directly. My address is tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight in with two big pieces. Launched in 2006 and 2012, respectively. Both of these are Patek Philippe Nautilus 5711, but they are very distinct. This is the 5711-011, and this is the original version, the 5711-001. Both of them are 40 millimeters by 8.5 millimeters thick. Both of them are 120 meters water resistant, 45-hour power reserve, high-grade finish, and of course fully lumed, but they are very different watches in character. My preference for practicality is actually the silver white dial with the blackened indices and hands just for legibility. From a collector standpoint, this watch was also built for a shorter period of time, from 2012 through 2020 when it was discontinued. This watch, of course, is about to be discontinued in 2021, but there are far more versions of the blue dial 5711, the 5711-001, the 010, and of course built over a much longer period of time. But there are further differences that distinguish these two pieces. Let's pop open the clasp. I don't quite have the nails for this, but taking a good look at the bracelet assembly, you can see these earlier versions feature screw-fixed removable links. Later versions of this watch, after 2012, so 2012 and later, they used pins and sleeves, which is frankly a cheaper and more primitive way of assembling a bracelet. So the timepiece that you see right here, although older and perhaps more common as a dial variant, is actually a very highly sought discontinued version because of the fact that the bracelet is built to a higher standard. There are also those who pine for the more nostalgic Poinçon de Genève or the Geneva Hallmark on the movement. While these are both technically caliber 324, the older watch features the Poinçon de Genève and a metallic hairspring, and then the later one features the Patek Philippe seal and a silicone hairspring. So technically speaking, they are distinct. A lot of folks are going to say they're going to go for the screw-fixed removable links in the bracelet and the Poinçon de Genève for traditional reasons, and then some perhaps will prefer the fact that this dial is only available in Patek Philippe seal and the pin sleeve bracelets. And I should mention there are some advantages to having a silicone hairspring, namely magnetic resistance. Let's do a quick Lume shot for these two. And you can see by night they're almost identical. You can see there's a little bit of reflection on the silver dial of the silver white dial, but this is a full-service sports watch and 120 meters water resistant, so you never have to worry about jumping into the surf with a Nautilus. Just like other highly water resistant integrated bracelet sports watches, it really shifts gears quite well from surf to turf, formal to informal, and back. Now, if you want to take a look at a full bracelet sports watch and a very different kind, well, let's jump to early spring with the Grand Seiko SBGA 413 with a lovely Cherry Blossom Seasons series dial. This watch was launched in 2020 as part of 4 watches celebrating the 4 seasons. Now, the watch, of course, is 40 millimeters. It is titanium. And as you can see, it's a lovely combination of polish and satin, which lets you know this is a grade 5 style titanium, which is very, very hard and scratch resilient. It also uses the 1967 to present 62GS polyhedron case, which gives you a wonderful contrast between curves and creases, satin and polish, and all of the polish rendered with a spinning tin plate with all of the work done against that plate by hand and eye coordination. This art, which is called Zaratsu polish at Grand Seiko, is done on a Zalitz machine, originally of European origin. Today, the foremost practitioners of this type of manual black polish are actually the folks in Japan making these watches. Now, the dial is more than just the textured and shaded base. Although that is gorgeous, you can see that the hands as well as the indices have been finished on diamond-tipped milling tools, and the artisans who create these components only create these components. They do this all day. So both without and within, this is a hand-finished watch, and you can see the precision of the hands. Dauphine in profile and then satinated on their top, and they have razor-like polished edges with mirrored shine, truly special. Turn it all over. Can't quite see the spring drive movement, but you're going to have to take my word for it. This spring drive caliber is a automatic 3-day power reserve. It has both stop seconds and a quick set date. It has the precision of plus or minus 15 seconds per month, and you can note the distinctive smooth glide of the spring drive hand. That is distinctive of spring drive. No Swiss lever, so no start-stop, no vibrations per hour. It's just a continuous glide, combining a quartz regulator and mechanical drive. There are no batteries, there are no capacitors, there are no stepper motors in this watch. It achieves quartz precision with mostly mechanical watchmaking, and this is a mechanical watchmaker-made, watchmaker-regulated, and watchmaker-serviced movement for life. All of this is also 100 meters water resistant, so you get a very versatile watch. Now, in full titanium, though it's a 40 millimeter, it does wear a little bit more compact and light on the wrist because it is so light in titanium. It's not a terribly thick watch. That you can see it has a dramatic vintage-inspired cambered box section sapphire to evoke the 62 GS of 1967. It's a handsome watch on the wrist and a lovely piece. Now, we may as well do a wrist shot for one of the Nautili, or Nautiluses, because you should know how it looks on a wrist. It is flat, it is broad. It does wear like a slightly larger watch. Think of it as more of a 41 or a 42, but it is very flat, very comfortable. And one of the undersold virtues of an oversold watch is that this is really an ergonomic dream. Super comfortable. It fits much flatter and works better on a smaller wrist than something like a 41 millimeter Royal Oak. You can also see no problem fitting that underneath the cuff. Okay, different price point, different brand, sticking with stainless steel. 40 millimeters in stainless steel. This is the Omega Deville Trésor, a timepiece that represented the first of the Trésor series to be available in stainless steel. It features a lovely gradient shade linen dial, but unlike many gradient dials, which tend to fade predictably from their center to their edge, this one actually features a semi-aged look whereby the color and the texture varies from region to region across the dial. So it has this lovely vintage patina look, although it's not expressly patina. It has the look of a well-worn vintage linen dial. So you get that patina look without the grating fauxtina lume here. And in fact, there is no lume. This is a pure dress watch and a remarkably thin one. Manual wind, caliber 8910, allowing this watch to be 10.4 millimeters thick, which is one of the thinnest modern Omega models and certainly one of the thinnest of the tri-level coaxials. The dial does feature a little bit of camber, so if you look closely, you can see the seconds hand and the minute hand have been rolled to curve over the edge of the dial and underneath the curve of the crystal. Now, the watch does include some refinements such as hacking or stop seconds and a time zone function, so you can change the hand that marks the hour as you travel. Applique indices doubled at the quarters, very good looking, like I mentioned. It is a manual wind, thin profile master chronometer, and you can see it is a master chronometer, so it's basically amagnetic, also very shock tolerant, and being a manual wind, it has a 72-hour power reserve courtesy of its twin mainspring barrels. Full balance bridge with a free sprung index for shock tolerance and that hairspring in silicon, as well as an anti-magnetic escapement to make this a robust watch. You can also see there's a lovely arabesque Côte de Genève across the bridges, and while this is a mechanically finished movement, Omega sure does it with flair, designing it thoughtfully with engine turning on the base plate, the arabesque spiral Côte de Genève. There's a beveling, mechanical but handsome, on the edge of the bridges, and then Omega uses blackened screws rather than the more common blued screws. Really good looking watch. Throw it on the wrist, super flat, super flush. This is a dress watch, and you can see it's a glorious match for my cuff right here, as well as low enough to clear the cuff. A great way to get into a dress watch without having to pay Calatrava money, but getting modern tech spec and a great brand that will be around forever to service your watch and provide parts. We're going way upscale now. You could spend Nautilus money on a Nautilus, or you could spend Nautilus money on something that offers so much more. This too is a sports watch, but entirely hand-finished, protected by numerous patents, truly original, innovative, and unlike anything else. This is a watch built by a company that's probably only going to build about 2 to 3 dozen of them per year at a brand that makes only 150 pieces per year of all references. Launched in 2019, this is the Debatoon DB28 GS Granblue. It is a rotating bezel sports watch that is 105 meters water resistant, using the spring-loaded floating lug chassis of the 2011 GPHG Aiguille d'Or winning DB28, it adds a sporting aspect that the DB28 typically does not have. Now you can see the first thing that's different is the unidirectional rotating bezel, which you can mark against the minute hand and use as a timing instrument. It also features a center seconds hand, which is a first for the DB28 models. Now if you look closely, you can see that finish is everything you would expect from a high horology watch, with mirrored anglage, black polish everywhere, micro light engraving, the super deep graving rather than a hackneyed Côte de Genève, giving the watch traditional finish but with a modern look. You could see mirrored surfacing across the triple shock protected bridge for the balance. That shock protection, the twin self-adjusting barrels, the technique for bluing titanium by flame, the bi-element flat hairspring that beats concentrically like an overcoil, the escapement, and the titanium and white gold balance, all of that protected by patents. Look carefully and you can see there is a power reserve indicator for the manual wind 5-day power reserve. That sits at 9 o'clock. And then there is a minute repeater style governor that slows down the discharge of energy from the mainspring barrel. All of this 13 millimeters thick, 44 millimeters in diameter, but you're asking why slow down the discharge of energy from the mainspring barrel? It seems to be running just fine. Well, if you're new to this watch, get ready for a light show. As you can see, it does use conventional luminescent material from Black Badger, but it's got something more up its sleeve. Dynamo-driven LED lighting, backlighting the sapphire bezel so you can gauge the time of your dive, or simply the time elapsed by night. You can see that it drives out of the mainsprings, and a minute repeater style centrifugal governor slows down the discharge of power. You can also see the power reserve indicator moving in real time as it discharges. That is an absolute circular supernova, the best lume available on any watch anywhere. And you get a better look at the Black Badger lume. Again, this watch is 105 meters water resistant, so it is a true sports watch and an easy one to wear. These are the intermediate style lugs that are either 54 or 51 millimeters across the wrist, depending on their extension. So throw it on the wrist, you can see it's actually flatter than you might expect. It's not thin, but for a dive watch with that much going on and a 5-day power reserve, it is pretty slender. You can also see that I have plenty of clearance on both sides of my wrist, and all in titanium. It is super light, and it's grade 5 titanium, so it's going to be both lighter than steel and more scratch resistant than steel. And the attention to detail is gorgeous with the coined knurling of the bezel and the microlight engraving of the flank of the case. It is a bullhead winder, it is a screw down crown, just a super entertaining piece and the ultimate horological conversation piece. Let's talk about some mainstream brands for a little bit, but a non-mainstream watch from a mainstream brand. This came out in 2018, and it was easily the most intriguing Omega of that year, based on 2013's Speedmaster Moonwatch Dark Side of the Moon, and for that matter, the standard Moonwatch. This is the Speedmaster Moonwatch Dark Side of the Moon Apollo 8, dedicated to Apollo 8, which traveled around the dark side of the moon in December of 1968. We'll see you on the other side, the transmission back to mission control. As you can see, the movement, which is based on the Lemania 1873 like a standard Moonwatch, is nothing like the Omega 1863 you'll find on a display caseback Moonwatch. This watch features a combination of silver satination on the steel components and then blackening and laser ablation of the brass components to create the image of the lunar surface across the bridges. Manual wind 48-hour power reserve. It is a Moonwatch caliber, even though this is the 44.25 millimeter scratch-resistant ceramic dark side of the moon case. A lot going on here. You can see the tachymeter is custom and also ceramic. Being ceramic, the case is remarkably light on the wrist, and it's only about 50 millimeters from lug to lug, so don't let the 44 plus fool you. You can see it uses a set of cantilevered indices that are stepped outboard from a racing dial hash mark track outboard. If you're familiar with the Omega racing dials from the late 60s to the present, this is that checkered flag motif. And then you have yellow varnished hands for chronograph seconds, minutes, and hours. You also have, once again, that laser ablation and the view through skeletonized bridges, which include the lunar surface, back to the mechanisms of the chronograph on the other side. You can see that even the strap is special, being a combination of yellow stitching and black leather. It even includes a pin buckle made in ceramic. This is where, for example, say Hublot would give you some sort of DLC titanium or steel. Well, by making the buckle out of ceramic, it avoids scratching, just like the case. Throw it on the wrist, it is substantial, no doubt, but it's not huge. It also is a little bit thinner than a standard dark side of the moon because of the use of the Moonwatch caliber rather than a caliber 9300 automatic chrono. A timepiece that wears well in spite of its size. It's also light because it's made entirely of sapphire and ceramic. Just a good looking piece, and you can see it's just about fitting underneath my cuff, so it might be more versatile than you think. Let's do a quick Lume shot because this is a good one. They warm up my other two watches too for Lume shots. We're back with the dark side. Note that the insert in the Omega crown is lumed, and so is the full tachymeter scale. Okay, you guys can probably guess already what you're looking at, but do you know which variant it is? This, launched new for 2020, one of the most popular watches of the year, the Breitling Super Ocean Heritage 57, and this was the first of two limited editions. The one with the black dial, there was a second with a blue dial and a blue bezel. This model, the first of the two limited series, is a 250-piece edition. The second was 1,000. So this is by far the scarcer of the two. It's based on the reference 1004 Super Ocean that came out in 1957, and it is super compact for a diver at only 10.1 millimeters thick, and though a 42 millimeter, it's 42 millimeters at the edge of the bezel, not at the case, so it actually wears a lot more compact than that. It's a simple, chronometer certified 100 meter vintage style diver. It's not an ISO 6425 because the bezel will move in both directions, just like the 1957 original. This watch is very true to size, and note they resisted the temptation to stick a date on the dial. It is a no-date dial, brilliantly balanced with the same fashion of hands and indices as the past, but with a lovely and expressive set of rainbow colors. Super easy to wear. The watch is ultra compact across the wrist, and you can see how much clearance I have on both sides. Down the barrel, these lugs come nowhere near the edge of my wrist. The Stabe manufactured chainmail bracelet is the only one to wear on this watch. It's made for it, it looks brilliant, and it is super slinky and comfortable. The watch has a ceramic bezel insert, so it's nice and scratch resistant, and being 100 meters, this is a watch you can obviously take swimming with no second thoughts. It's just, remember, it's not strictly a dive watch. What it is, however, is one of the most handsome watches of the 2020 model year, and absolutely to die for if you're a Breitling fan or a fan of vintage divers. Now, another Breitling watch that came out, harking back to another vintage model, also a 2020 model year, but this one looking back to 1983 and 84, and the rebirth of Breitling in the aftermath of the quartz crisis. The Schneider family had bought the company from Willy Breitling, who was the last member of the original controlling family, and they launched a new version of the Chronomat, which came out in the early 1940s as a primitive circular slide rule watch that anticipated the Navitimer. The Chronomat was reborn in the early 80s with the input from the Italian aerobatic squadron Frecce Tricolore, effectively Italy's Red Arrows, Thunderbirds, Blue Angels, but they worked through 1982 and 1983, providing input on what a modern aviator's chronograph should be like, and that created the Breitling Chronomat of 1984, which was no longer a circular slide rule, but a rotating bezel sports chronograph, and that's exactly what we have right here. This one looks back to history with the rouleau bracelet, and make no mistake, though it has the look of the mid-80s, this one is built like the anchor chain of a battleship. It feels as solid as it looks, just gorgeous with the polished intermediates, the lovely taper from link to link, the satin primaries, and then there's a little polished bevel along the shoulders. This is just a gorgeous bracelet that feels as good as it looks. The case, 42 millimeters, and you can see it's a little bit of a cushion profile. It has all the hallmarks of the 1983 and 84 Chronomats, starting with the rider tabs to make the bezel easier to grip, and then the crown with an onion profile and that rouleau bracelet, a really good looking piece that wears substantial. It's not oversized. I would call 42 in a sports watch these days more full-sized, and that really describes this watch. B01 caliber, 3-day power reserve, vertical clutch, column wheel, plenty of lume, 200 meters water resistant. You can see how Breitling builds these watches, just like tanks. Captive bezel construction with screws fixing the bezel to the case. These screws are not ornamental. They do physically attach the bezel to the case so it can't be snapped off by accident. Look through the case back, you can see caliber B01 is actually a pretty good looking movement. What surprises me here is that the movement itself was not designed to be seen. It was originally designed for a solid caseback chronomat when it debuted back in 2009. Today, The B01 can be seen, and though not intended for display casebacks, it's actually one of the better looking vertical clutch chronographs I've encountered. And of course, like all modern mechanical Breitlings, it is a chronometer as well as a chronograph. One more thing. The column wheel feel with this watch, it's as good as or better than the truly reference point watches. Think Datograph, Rolex Daytona, Zenith El Primero Caliber 400. The feel of this column wheel is just as crisp and positive, and it compares favorably with those Galacticos of the chronograph segment. Okay, two from FPJorn, and both very special. On the left, made in 10 pieces, this is the FPJorn Torbjorn Souverain Labyrinth dial. So it's 40 millimeters in platinum, but that's not the standout feature. You get everything you expect on the Torbjorn Souverain, including the deadbeat seconds, courtesy of the remontoir constant force device, the power reserve that indicates 0 when fully wound, the 21.6 beat rate Torbjorn with an overcoil hairspring, free-sprung architecture, and 6-position adjustment. You also get the Labyrinth dial. It is made of 18-karat rose gold, alternately satinated, chiseled, and hand-engraved. You can see this hand-finished dial, making the watch even more expressly handcrafted, and Jorn making case, movement, and dial all in-house. This one is 1 of 10, and one of the most arduous dials to create. You can see that the Torbjorn, as well as the time displays, are inside a black polished steel bezel that frames all of these features, and if you look carefully at the Torbjorn, you can see it has wonderful depth of field. It is truly gorgeous with a wire-style cage, sort of like a filigree effect, and then that gorgeous pirouette. You can also see that the half bridge for the Torbjorn is specular finished, rounded continuously and black polished all the way around. Turn it over, you can see the movement is also in 18-karat rose gold. So this watch in platinum with a gold dial and a gold movement feels as heavy as an Olympic medal. It's truly special. You can see the backside of the remontoir constant force device with its second locking lever, all black polish. That is very difficult to achieve, but then you can see the titanium linear spring that acts as the buffer. For the first 28 hours of power reserve, the barrel never directly drives the Torbjorn. Rather, the barrel unloads 1 second's worth of energy into the linear spring, which unloads that energy into the escapement to achieve constant amplitude of the balance, which is the holy grail of chronometry for 28 hours. So wind it daily at the same time, and the watch will maintain outstanding chronometric performance because of that constant amplitude, constant force feature. And of course, because it does have that 1 second discharge of energy from the remontoir, it can drive a deadbeat seconds display. Taking a look at it on the wrist, super compact. Jorn watches in 40 millimeters are just a pleasure. Under 10 millimeters thick, 48 millimeters from lug to lug, an outstanding size for a smaller wrist. In spite of the formidable complication, this is a great all-arounder and, I would dare say, even a unisex option. Now, taking a quick look at a wonderful piece, because we don't see a whole lot of third-generation Resonance black labels. Of course, the Resonance first launched in 2000, entered its second generation with a gold movement in mid-2004, and after 2009, this watch debuted, which was the third-generation chronomètre à résonance. Functionally, it's exactly the same. 2 independent time zones, a power reserve indicator, twin mainspring barrels, 1 indicator for both barrels, and you wind them and set the independent time zones with the bullhead winder. Let me remove my surly fingerprints here. What's different about this model compared to the first 2 generations is that the reference time uses scrolling 24-hour displays and coaxial discs featuring the hours and the minutes. And this is a 24-hour display. The original was simply a mirror of this 12-hour dial. So now it's more useful as a travel time watch for those of you who might be keeping track of far-flung acquaintances. Now, mechanically, it works the same way as the earlier Resonance watches. 2 barrels, 2 trains, 2 escapements, 2 balances, and there is no physical geared link or spring link between them. It is the parasitic losses, the friction, the vibration that emanate out from these escapements and mobile balances that cause the 2 to synchronize to each other like metronomes or pendulums placed in close proximity. The idea being that both of them should relentlessly hold their 6-position chronometric adjustment, but if one does get thrown a little bit through virtuous reinforcement, the other one will pull it back into synchronization. So if one speeds up or slows down, the other one will resynchronize it via resonance. And you can see the movement here also made of solid rose gold. You can see there's also a little rose gold pinion screw and a black polished rack that allows the FPJorn watchmaker to adjust very minutely the distance between the balances. And because it takes about 7 to 10 minutes for resonance to take purchase on the two balances. Your seconds hands might not be synchronized, so there is a flyback mechanism that allows you to resynchronize them after 7 to 10 minutes. A really cool watch. It's the Black Label edition. So black dial with platinum at FPJorn, that means Black Label. It's a series that's been available since 2008 for those who buy at FPJorn boutiques and espace, but also only for those who do so after having previously bought a new FPJorn watch. Moreover, only 2 examples of a Black Label model can be made per year, and that's all doors combined, all boutiques combined. So this is a really striking watch that's rare, a technical tour de force, and when it came out back in 2000, a true world premiere. FPJorn was the first to achieve resonance in a wristwatch, and this watch is special for that alone. Let's talk about rose gold and let's talk about Longa. One model that we've seen before, one we rarely see. Let's start with the unusual one. This, of course, is the Longa Cabaret, 25.5 millimeters wide by 43 millimeters lug to lug. It takes after the original Longa arcade-shaped watch of 1994. It's a little bit more contemporary. It was built from 2007 to 2010, and the model you see here is particularly striking with a black dial and a rose gold case. It's a different look. Even by Longa standards, it's vintage, but whereas most Longa watches seem to be designed to emulate the look of a pocket watch converted to a wristwatch format, this actually pays tribute to the first third of the 20th century when a Longa was still building early wristwatches prior to the communist collectivization of German horology after World War II. So there was a brief period of Longa wristwatch manufacture, and because the shape of watches for the wrist was fluid back then, many of them did take non-round, square, or rectangular forms, and this watch pays tribute to that brief history of the original Longa company. Now, it features on its reverse side a gloriously hand-finished manufacturer caliber L931, and as you can see, the watch features German silver bridges, and actually I amend my guidance from before because this is the L93. Work would have started on this movement in 1993. The watch came out in 1997, but I want to explain, of course, that Longa movement references start with first 2 digits, the year work started, so 1993. The third digit is the number of movements started up to that point that year. So 1 means this was the first movement started in 1993. Now that we went through that brief technical lesson, let's talk about how beautiful it is. German silver bridges and plates. It's a nickel copper zinc alloy, and the copper gives it that golden hue. German silver is not actually silver. It'd be called Mosso in the Swiss French watchmaking regions. Blued screws, but note there are also a few black polished screws. On the edge of the bridges, mirrored anglage of the highest grade. Glasuta stripes across the bridge here because these are not Côte de Genève. We're not in Switzerland. Black polish on the escape wheel cap as well as the swan's neck regulator. Fired blue screws. Pivot jewels set in golden chaton, just like a pocket watch, and then a 3/4 style bridge, again like a pocket watch. Also note that the balance cock has been freehand engraved with a burr, and no engines used here, no lathes. All of that engraving done by hand. The movement with a 42-hour manual wind power reserve, and of course the panorama datum, the double-digit date that is a signature of Longa. Throw it on the wrist, it's got an impressive presence. Don't think of it as a 25.5 millimeter watch. Think of it as more like a 38 millimeter round watch, and you get an approximate sense of how it wears. It's physically impressive without being large or bulky, and you can see it is nice and flat with a sloped flank, so if you want to wear it as a dress watch under a cuff, it's going to work real well. And for good measure, inside this rose gold case, you have a dial that is black galvanized, but the dial base itself is sterling silver. The same is true for this Datograph Perpetual. It is a flyback chronograph. It is a perpetual calendar. It is loomed. It is 40.9 millimeters in rose gold, and its dial, which includes a sporting tachymeter, is made of sterling silver. The moon phase, because this is a Longa, is made of solid gold. It is a very special watch. Of course, a perpetual calendar, so it can distinguish between irregular length months and also cope with leap years. The Dato Perpetual was originally launched back in 2006, and this rose gold model came out in 2010. It's easy to wear, though 14 millimeters thick. It's not super slim for a dress watch, but it is substantial, and you get that for what you've paid. Also, this one comes with a full rose gold deployant clasp, which was an upcharge option at the Longa boutique. This is not something that is typically included, even on a flagship complication like this. It's also a very smart watch, and I'll show you why I say that. The watch has a function where you pull the crown out and then you index the trigger up at 10 o'clock, and all of the calendar indications move. Note that even the moon phase is adjusting. So if the watch should stop for whatever reason and fall behind, you pull out the crown and you toggle it however many days behind it is fallen. So if it stopped 4 days ago, pull the crown out 1, 2, 3, 4, and then set the time. A brilliant way of resyncing without having to individually set all the registers. On the reverse side, caliber L952. It's based on the original dotograph movement, the L951. Aesthetically, it's actually the same as the standard Dato because all of the calendar functions are on the dial side. Note the fact that the clutch, just the clutch for the chronograph features multiple sharp outward and interior angles where two bevels meet. And because this is made of steel, this bridge, or this clutch, I should say, it's even more difficult to finish those components, and they do both outward and sharp interior angles. Everything else is of the standard you saw on the Cabaret, but there's simply more of it, and it's more beautiful. You can also see the freehand engraved balance cock is that much bigger, and it uses an overcoil, which is an upscale balance refinement that you don't find on all Longa watches, so it's nice to see it here. This is a truly superior product. When people ask me, Tim, what watch gives me the best value? 9 times out of 10, if they're looking for high horology, I'll say buy a used Longa. As good as anything Patek, anything FPJorn, anything Moser, and perhaps even a little bit better than all of the above in finish. And in terms of depreciation, you gotta like what you're getting for the money. And as I mentioned, this Dato is lumed. I think among group brands, I hold Longa in highest esteem. Among independents, Debatoon is truly where my heart is. But a lot of folks don't like the, shall we say, techie and semi-trekky look of the DB28 with its open dial and visible barrel bridge, which does look an awful lot like a Starfleet command badge. Well, for them, I always say get into the brand via the DB25. Conventional dials, conventional lugs, and technically speaking, you're getting the same grade of movement. Now, this is the DB25 automatic, and it's made in a discontinued 40mm case size. So between a relatively thin profile, very spare, gossamer, and graceful lugs, and a solid dial with traditional guilloche, this is a friendly way to get into an avant-garde brand without feeling like an exhibitionist. You can wear this watch with discretion. It is super flat, under 11mm thick, automatic winding. It has a 6-day power reserve, which is truly special. And you can see it fits my wrist beautifully. A wrist as small as 13 centimeters is going to wear this watch well. So it is a unisex option for both him and for her. And remember, this company only making 150 watches a year. As with FPJorn, Debatoon is fully invested in the production process, making the dials, the cases, and the movements in-house. Now here you can see the automatic movement that debuted back in 2006. It has shock protection on the center of the rotor and no expenses spared. The rotor arms are made of titanium fired blue, and the mass is made of platinum for maximum outboard mass and maximum mechanical advantage in winding. All the inertia, the polar moment, as they like to say in engineering, is massive. Now, taking another look at the center, you can see that there are cantilever springs with jewels to shock protect the bearing at the center of the rotor. You have 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs on the balance, and all of those technical features we mentioned before in the DB28 are present and correct. So this watch has the shock tolerance of a sports watch, the 6-day automatic winding power reserve, and the same chronometric qualities as other Debatoon timepieces with more audacious dial side styles. Now, because they make their dials in-house, you can see this dial, which is blueprinted on silver, includes both a toroidal hour track and minute track, and then its center real rose lathe guilloche. This is turned on an engine. Debatoon owns the rose lathes to create genuine, that is cut rather than stamped guilloche. If you want a handmade watch that is immaculate, traditionally crafted, and yet packed with original engineering and patents, you want the Debatoon DB25, and I can't guarantee you I'll always have this because this is a 40mm version that is infrequently seen and very much discontinued. Again, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to buy this one. It won't last long. Sticking with traditional sizes, this is a watch that is difficult to describe in terms of size. It's 8.8mm thick, it's about 43mm lug to lug, actually about 44 lug to lug, and then 37mm wide. This, of course, is the Patek Philippe And it is the 5940G, a glorious white gold 5940. It has lovely white gold applique Breguet numerals on a matte black dial base. And everyone knows that when you see Breguet numerals on a Patek, especially white gold numerals on a black dial base, you're looking at a very, very, very special watch. Now, taking a quick look at the perpetual calendar, you can see you've got everything you need. As with the Longa, this can deal with leap years and irregular length months, but it is a lot more compact. When you throw this watch, quick case back display. When you throw this watch on the wrist, it is super low slung. It's a 37, but I would say it's more like a, again, we're being very fine here, a 39 on the wrist. It's got more wrist presence than a 37. Even it is super flat and flush. It's very much a dress watch, and you can see these lugs are coming nowhere near the edge of my wrist. Very good fit here. I would recommend it for a wrist as small as 13 centimeters circumference. A super special watch. This basic model was launched in 2012, so you get the general idea of when they were made. Now, you've got the Patek Philippe seal. You have a silicone anti-magnetic hairspring, a Gyromax style balance, which is free sprung. It's been adjusted in 6 positions, which is one more than the chronometer standard of 5, and that combination of features, the Gyromax balance, the silicone hairspring, the Patek Philippe seal, and the 6-position adjustment means Patek guarantees this watch will run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per 24 hours from the factory, a very impressive attestation. The watch also has a fluid and seamless appearance when viewed from the front, because you'll note that the case and the bezel are all of one piece. This one is a backloader. Everything goes in through the back, the dial, the crown, the stem, all of that, and of course the movement. Everything is just, as you can see, seamless on the dial side. There are no breaks in the case line, and there's a wonderful domed gadroon that abuts the sapphire and follows it all the way around the shaped crystal. A truly special watch. It uses the caliber 240Q. It's the 240 micro rotor that originally debuted back in 1977, and it is the upscale of the two Patek Philippe general production automatics. So you've got the 324 and later the 26-330 center rotor movements, and then you've got the 240 and you've got the 31-260 that's in the regulator, and those are the micro rotor movements. And micro rotors are both more difficult to assemble and more beautiful because they give you the convenience of winding, but with the thin profile of a manual wind and the open display case back of a manual wind. 48-hour power reserve, 21.6 beat rate, very nicely finished. I wish I could get a little bit closer, but you're gonna have to take my word, this is everything you would expect from Patek Philippe in terms of finishing. Black polish, anglage, Côte de Genève, perlage, and satination, all of that with the 5940G. Now here's something you don't see every day. This is a model launched in 2017 by Laurent Ferrier with the classic gale case. This is the outstanding Laurent Ferrier Gale Classic Tourbillon double F. The double F for double finished, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. The first thing you're going to notice about this watch is that there is no hallmarking. There is no hallmarking because there's nothing to hallmark. This 41 millimeter, I would call it eye-wateringly beautiful high horology piece, is all stainless steel. It gets better. Inside this stainless steel case, you get a Grand Faux enamel dial with applique fired blue Arabic numerals. The assegai style hands at center with their spear profile are so graceful. Again, it's almost sharp enough to pierce your heart. You fall in love with it, and it's a trauma to let it go. Now, this was the first dial-side tourbillon created by Laurent Ferrier. Previously, the double spiral tourbillon included a solid dial and a display back with the tourbillon, but folks asked for a tourbillon that was visible from the dial side. As a result, the bridge for the tourbillon carriage is now finished on both sides because you can inspect it from both sides. It's a 1-minute tourbillon that beats away at 21.6, and again, look at that enamel dial with a visible portion of the movement on the dial side. You can see that the well for the chaton holding the pivot jewel has been black polished internally, and that the same treatment has been rendered on the edges of the bridge. Turn it all over, and you can see that the bridge proper on the case back uses the same form as Patek Philippe Observatory Trials tourbillon movements. So that is a competition chronometer tourbillon made by Patek Philippe in the early 20th century. This specific bridge architecture pays tribute to Laurent Ferrier's longtime employer, Patek Philippe, where he would have been familiar with this type of movement when they came in for service, and he would have seen them around the office and the workshops from their heyday in the early to mid 20th century. So this bridge architecture, which is essentially a straight bar and then a more elaborate structure opposite. That comes directly from Patek Philippe. You have two hairsprings 180 degrees opposite each other. So because their mass isn't perfectly centered, when one is in a certain orientation with respect to gravity, it'll run fast, the other will run slow. The idea being, by reorienting their anchor points 180 degrees apart, they will cancel each other out. And that combines with the somersaulting motion of the tourbillon to cancel out the deviation effects of gravity on the accuracy of the watch. You can also see that finish here is world class. Look how many interior angles there are on this structure. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then because it is double F, double finished, the other side of this bridge is finished just as exquisitely as the top. You can see one side features black polish, the other side features satination, and the tourbillon carriage itself is entirely black polished. Very special. You'll also note that the Côte de Genève are a mile wide, and so is the anglage. This is anglage broad enough and mirrored enough to impress Philippe Dufour. People ask me why I am so enamored of Laurent Ferrier, and it's because of the quality of what you get. Stainless steel, no precious metal premium. You're getting an enamel dial. You're getting immaculate hand finish. You're getting one of the most technically innovative and horologically relevant chronometer grade tourbillons on the market, and this little gem, all in stainless steel, is durable enough to wear on a daily basis, and in spite of the power hungry complication, it still has an 80-hour power reserve. This is as good as it gets, folks. The Laurent Ferrier Gale Classic Tourbillon Double F. Guys, if you love what you see, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com, for all of your purchase and pricing questions.